Greetings and welcome to LA Quill. Today we're diving into Chapter 4 of Arianna's tale. From beneath lowered lashes, Arianna studied her guest as he finished his meal of rabbit stew, meager though it was. The man before her was so graceful, even as he ate, that it almost hurt to watch him. And it was a kind of subconscious grace, as if he wasn't even aware of it. It was something that utterly fascinated Arianna, and gave him the mark of the nobility. She was sure he was an earl, maybe a duke, but he had said nothing to confirm that assumption. It had been almost a full month since she had found him on the beach, and she still didn't know his name. He'd only remained unconscious for a couple of days, but when he woke he had refused to reveal his identity, even after weeks in her company. He was almost fully healed now, and could have left several days ago if he'd been so inclined. His continued presence was making her nervous, but she couldn't fathom why. Probably just that I find him fascinating, she thought to herself. And in those moments, when she was absolutely honest with herself, she admitted that she found him very attractive. He'd been polite enough, though she had noticed him studying her more often these past few days, and it was beginning to make her uncomfortable to the point where she was going to ask him to leave if she had to. Arianna knew more about him than he thought she did, however. He had a tattoo on his left wrist, and she recognized it from one of her mother's many books as one of the symbols used by the Abatal Empire. She'd known he wasn't a local immediately. The hair, the skin, all of it indicated a more Eastern ancestry. Only the eyes confused her. If he was of desert descent, why did he have blue eyes? It was one of the many questions she had about him. And there were so many more. But he hadn't volunteered the information, and it would be rude to pry. He probably wouldn't tell her anyway. She would have to satisfy herself with what she could dream up. And she could dream up quite a bit. Arianna jumped as he came up beside her and placed his bowl in the sink. She hadn't heard him move. She never did. His hand lightly brushed the top of hers, and it was quite obvious it was not an accident. It wasn't the first time that had happened. She didn't know much about men, having lived a fairly sheltered life, but she did know when a man was being a bit too friendly with her person. She withdrew her hands and folded them primly in front of her, her gaze on her worn-out slippers. She didn't want him to get any ideas, so she wouldn't even meet his eyes, afraid that it would send the wrong message. She was a proper young lady, conventional in every way, and not one to usually entertain men in her cottage. He smiled at her response, though she didn't see it. A wonderful meal, as always, lady. He moved away, sitting once more and taking up the book he had been reading before his meal. He seemed to know several languages, since he'd read most of her mother's books. She wished she'd had the nerve to ask him what some of them meant. There were so many she couldn't read. She only knew trade tongue, after all. She'd never really paid any attention to her mother's attempts to teach her any other languages. Besides, she wasn't exactly linguistically gifted. The stranger seemed to be, with his grasp of at least 3 languages as far as she could tell. His continued presence bothered her, even though he wasn't actually doing anything at the moment. How she wished he would just leave and never come back. He was more than healthy enough to manage to take himself back to his own home, wherever that was. So, Arianna thought desperately, why doesn't he? She only knew that he was still in her home, eating her food, and for no reason she could discover. Some days she was even mildly afraid of him, and she wasn't sure why. Arianna turned to him in the fading light, not sure how to address her concerns, but knowing she had to. She couldn't stand feeling like this, wanting him to touch her one moment and leave her alone the next. It was too frustrating to bear. Her nerves were already about to shatter into a million pieces. He was pushing her to the brink. Finally she blurted out, "When are you leaving?" Her face went bright red immediately. She hadn't meant to be so rude and was completely mortified. She'd never spoken that way to anyone, and certainly not to someone she was healing. He was a guest in her home. She had to remember that. Instead of taking offense, he laughed deeply, tossing the book aside. Tired of my company? Her face deepened in color, if it was possible, but she stayed silent. He chuckled again before answering. His laughter almost trailed along her skin, and he knew it. She knew he knew it. Do not fear, Lady Arianna. I intend to leave at sunup. He leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. Relieved, Arianna averted her eyes and said softly, I have no such title, my lord. It didn't feel right for him to address her using a title she did not possess. He cocked his head to one side. That wasn't a surprise to him, since she was obviously a peasant. It bothered her to be addressed as such, and he enjoyed every moment of baiting her. He wasn't quite sure why. For a moment, all he said was, perhaps not, but it gives me pleasure to say it. Now that sounded arrogant, but he didn't care. He wanted to bait her, to see what could get under her skin. The why of it didn't matter. Instead of continuing the conversation, he simply rose and said, Thank you for all you have done, lady. I would surely have died without your assistance. I will leave at daybreak, so if I do not see you in the morning, know that you will always have my thanks. With that said, he retreated into what had once been her brother's room, and she watched him go without a word. Arianna sighed, glad that he was leaving soon. Nothing could please her more. That was what she told herself, anyway. She sensed that there was something behind his words, but it was nothing she could understand. She was relieved that this would all soon be over. That much she knew. There was another feeling, however, one deep inside. It was the one she was desperately trying to ignore. It felt faintly like regret. Candle marks later, from a deep sleep, something, maybe some small sound, awakened Arianna. Someone was in her room. She opened her mouth to scream, but a hand clamped down to silence her. She felt someone push her nightgown up around her waist and heard the sound of tearing fabric. She started to struggle in earnest, fearing the worst. She opened her eyes and met the icy blue ones staring back at her. Despite her feeble attempts to escape, within moments the man was above her. The man to whom she had opened her home, and he had her naked and spread beneath him. She felt the cool night air upon her bare flesh. He leaned down against her, forcing her body into the straw-filled mattress, hurting her. She actually managed to scream once, but quickly received a slap for her efforts. Her cottage was too far away from the village for anyone to hear her anyway, so she decided it was best to remain silent if she had any care for her own safety. Somehow she knew he'd beat her unconscious in order to assure her silence. He chuckled softly in her ear, nuzzling her almost gently. Suddenly there was a blue glow that surrounded her ankles and wrists, and it took Arianna a moment to realize that it was magic. She was being held in place by bonds of magic. Even though she'd never seen real magic before, she knew there was no way she could break free, no way to escape what appeared to be her fate. The magic frightened her, and she started to shake. Her fear made the man above her chuckle. Despite her desperate situation, his laughter drifted across her naked skin like the softest caress. What followed next was a blur of pain and fear that she tried to block out. Arianna met with limited success and could do nothing but suffer what he did to her. When he finally finished with her, he sat beside her and stared down at her naked body. She was utter perfection, and he quite enjoyed the way she looked in the dim light. He resolutely pushed aside anything he might be feeling. His eyes glinted cruelly as he continued to stare at her. I would stay and continue, lady, but I did promise to leave at sunup. I always keep my promises. He ran a hand down her body, resting it between her thighs, claiming her for his own. I find myself with a decision to make, to kill you now that I have what I want, or to let you live with the memory. Such a choice. His hand came up to touch her face, and she flinched in fear, convinced that he would kill her. He only laughed and leaned closer to her, kissing her deeply and roughly enough that her lips were left bruised. You're not worth the time it would take to kill you, he said against her lips. He knew he didn't mean it, but he wanted her to fear him. Besides, I find myself thinking I am rather fond of you. That much was true. He had grown fond of her these last few weeks. He would freely admit that he was attracted to her. He wouldn't have raped her otherwise. But there was something else in the back of his mind, something that didn't deserve closer scrutiny. He rose and dressed. Finally, he turned back to her, just as the sun rose. "Remember me well, lady. We have not seen the last of each other." He strode from the room and never looked back. Moments later, the bonds that held her dissolved into nothingness. Arianna stayed in bed for most of the day, glad that none of the village folk sought her out. She hurt, and she knew it was possible to use some of the many herbs around the cottage to ease her pain, but it wasn't the pain that made her sob. In fact, for some strange reason she couldn't understand, the pain was all that kept her sane. What weighed most heavily on her mind was the fact that her future, or at least the future she had planned for herself, now lay in shambles. Arianna had always dreamed of marrying a good man one day, having his children and keeping his home, doing everything that a good wife would do for her husband while still practicing her craft. All that was destroyed. No good man would have her now. Finally, well past midday, Arianna decided to stop feeling sorry for herself. What's done is done, she thought, knowing she could not change what had happened. There was no point in dwelling on the past. That much she had learned years ago. She rose, cleansed her body, and ate some dried biscuits, though she had to fight not to retch. Then she stripped her bed of all linens and burned them in the hearth, destroying all evidence of her ravishment. As she watched the fabric burn, she wished, for the first time in a long time, for someone to talk to. But she knew she couldn't tell anyone what had transpired in her bedchamber. Not ever. The world was advancing, but slowly. When a woman was raped, it was still said that she had asked for it, that she was to blame for the actions of the man who committed the crime, no matter the circumstances surrounding the incident. And Arianna could not bear to have the stigma attached to her name, to be branded a harlot before the entire village. So she would not mention this to anyone. She would simply have to move on with her life and forget last night had ever happened. There was no other option left to her. The only blessing to come from this horrible experience was that any regret she might have felt at his leaving had been destroyed by his act of cruelty. She was glad he was gone, and resolved never to think of him again. She chose to ignore his warning that they would meet again, since it was obviously meant to frighten her. It might have succeeded, but she refused to let fear rule her life. Arianna found herself momentarily angry at her brother. She had been expecting Darian for several days, and she couldn't help but think that if he'd been here, last night would never have happened. What had happened was as much Darian's fault as the stranger's. For a moment she let the rage well up inside her, and it felt good. She sighed and let go of her anger, knowing that it took too much energy to sustain that level of emotion. It really served no purpose, and Darian had no way of knowing that she was in danger. Besides, he wasn't here to bear the brunt of her anger anyway. The blame rested solely on the shoulders of the stranger who had shared her home. She hoped that one day, somehow, she would be able to make him pay for his crimes. She knew that it was a faint hope, but just the idea of revenge gave her something to focus on, something that wasn't the events of the previous night. She would hold on to that hope and remember it if ever she thought of him by accident. Maybe, she thought, I could go to Darian. I could leave here just as he did. I could go where no one knows me, where no one will know what happened. She knew it might help, being away from her little cottage. She might be able to forget if she didn't have to sleep in that bed every night. It was something to think on. For the moment, she would not think at all. She would instead focus on her craft, on helping the people of Icana Valley. There would be time enough to decide what she should do. Arianna went about her business, doing her level best to put all thoughts of the stranger out of her mind. And that's our tale from L.A. Quill today. If you enjoyed this chapter, let me know your favorite moment in the comments. Until next time, may your stories always be magical.